Welcome to selfdiscoveryradio.com, where the orchard of wisdom is just ready for picking. We celebrate your why, the journey that you've taken that inspires someone else. We support your services, we support your story. Come and be our guest, become a host, be an author with us. Come and see what we've got. Our next show is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Choose Positive Living. I'm your host, Sara Troy, and I have a repeat offender. Brent Marchant is back with us. Every year we do Who's Going to Win the Oscars, what movies were deserving, and which movies really should have been left out. Is it a trend, or is it a particular message that's been sent across, or have the movies that really that should have been at the top being not only nominated and winning. He has an extremely good track record. I invite you to go back to listen to his other shows that we've done on the Oscars and to see that he's about 95, 98% right. And so I'm really anxious to know what he's going to say today, except today, this show is going to be his pick for top 10 and top bottom movies that haven't made it into the Oscars. The next show that we're going to be doing will be his predictions of who is going to win and why. Now, we're unable to see Brent's beautiful face. He has a lovely mug and beard, but unfortunately his camera is not working today. So instead you're going to see the posters of the film movies that he's talking about. And hi, Brent, how are you, my love?
Hi, Sarah. Good to be back.
Good to have you back. Excellent. And I have to admit, there's quite a number of movies here that I am way behind on. But what I always love to do when I talk with you is like, okay, I can skip that one after speaking to you. I
That's
just
why
go
we
to
have
the
a
movies
bottom
that
10
count.
list.
Yeah, exactly. But we're going to go into some of the movies here that you've mentioned I know about. Some I don't at all. So this is very interesting. Tell people a little bit about you first before we jump in, because we've done movies on your books, and we've had shows on your books and on obviously on the Oscars, and people can go back and listen to all of them because you do write about the movies and the conscious message that comes from them. So just give everybody a little synopsis of you.
Well, sure. My name is Brent Marchant, for those who haven't met me or heard me before. And I write about movies from a particular perspective, basically focusing on films from how they reflect principles of conscious creation or the law of attraction. And those have been featured in the blog on my website, which is brentmarchant.com, and also in 3 books that I've written. Get the Picture, Conscious Creation Goes to the Movies, Consciously Created Cinema, The Movie Lover's Guide to the Law of Attraction, and Third Reel, Conscious Creation Goes Back to the Movies. So there's a lot of material, excuse me, that you can draw from. You can read all about my how I choose movies, the way I review them, the principles that are reflected in the films, and lots of good stuff.
Excellent. And he knows his stuff. And actually, I had him on with my brother once, who is actually a writer, a screen script writer as well. And it was great to have you both on and two
That was a
different
fun
perspectives.
show.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's there are so many movies out there, and it's really hard to choose. And I've got to see a few, this year that have been very pleasant and very surprising. Not as many as I want. I've got many on the list. I simply haven't had time to get down there to see them. Plus, I have a beautiful landlady who loves to go and see more simple movies, which I do recommend, Mary Poppins, etc. And we'll talk about that as we go. And but I have some on the list that I have to go and see, and I'm dying to know what you're going to say about them. But first, let's jump into the first movie. If Beale Street Could Talk.
Yes, we're starting with number 10 and working backwards. If Beale Street Could Talk was the first film adaptation in English of a James Baldwin novel. And this particular film deals with the story of a young man who is falsely accused of a crime and the efforts of his soon-to-be wife and their families to try and get him out of jail. And it's a very warm movie in many ways to show the love that exists in this African American family in Harlem in the 1970s. But it's also rather frustrating because you can see a lot of the hatred and the frustration and the false prejudice that's raised, that really took people down a path that they didn't deserve to go down because it wasn't true. Um, so you get a really strong sense of community and fellowship and love that permeates this group of people working on his behalf, in the face of such ugly uh, forces that are working against him as well. This movie was made by the same director who made the Oscar-winning film Moonlight a couple of years ago, and it's not quite as good as that film was, but it's still a pretty good effort. Features a wonderful cast, and features a good performance by Regina King in the supporting role as his future mother-in-law. She's been nominated for an Oscar, and she's won several other awards already. So this is a good movie. It's at times a little bit hard to watch because you feel the frustration coming through, but at the same time, it's also heartwarming to know that when you're in trouble, there are people who still love you and care about you and want to work for your benefit.
Really, you say it was set in the 70s, but quite honestly, this really could be today, couldn't it? Because
yeah.
We're right there at the moment where we're still seeing such injustices going on. And, 40 years on, it's not seemed to have changed. And, I think a good message to reflect on, like, that was back then. What was the excuse? Those were the times. What's our excuse today? And why is this still happening?
And it's also good to see that one of James Baldwin's books finally make it to the screen, because this is the first time that one of his books has been made into a screen adaptation in English. There was one that goes back a number of years ago that was done in French over across the pond. But basically, this is the first time you're seeing one of his books come to life, and it's really quite wonderful because you see through the movie the really rich character development that went into his writing, and that comes across pretty clearly in the film as well. Director Barry Jenkins, who made the film, also wrote the screenplay, and he really did justice to reflecting the character and quality of Baldwin's work.
A good story is always one that reflects life and, stirs people in either the injusticeness of it or stepping into the heart and the caring. But I think if it can propel them forward in some form of action, really that's when it's done its job, and people are still talking about it. That's where that consciousness steps in, isn't it? Don't just leave the theater and go, nice movie. What is it asking you to do? Because really, ultimately, that's the message, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in this one, you see both a very heartfelt sense of emotion and feeling coming through, as well as making a call for social justice. So the combination really works together quite well.
Well, I have seen the next movie, and I did enjoy it. Mission Impossible Fallout. I thought this one was rather good, actually.
It was a kick-ass adventure film from start to finish.
Yes.
I really enjoyed this. I mean, this is not typically the kind of film that I would necessarily feature in one of my reviews or in one of my books, because it's not really focused on giving you a lot of metaphysical or spiritual kinds of information. It's just pure entertainment, and it's done so well. The action in this film is nonstop from start to finish, and it's really also quite encouraging too to see a film that basically is featuring stunts that are all pretty much live action. You're not seeing a film here that is falling back and relying strictly on the CGI graphics to carry the story.
Or not just relying on the action. What I really loved about this one, and I've watched all of the Mission Impossibles, was the sense of camaraderie. This team weren't just together, because of the paycheck, because clearly in this movie they don't get it. But, it was about having each other's back, being there for each other because of where you've been in the past. You can't face death over and over again together without building a bond. And that that bond really, really did come through this time, which I thought was really nice. So, but I didn't find the action, although absolutely incredible, overbearing, where sometimes you
No.
get the action, it just takes over the
Yeah.
story. And I thought there was a really good balance in
Yes,
this.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And also, another thing too is that given how many films that have been in this franchise now, you're starting to see really the evolution and sophistication of the franchise coming through as well. It's not having to
Mm,
go with a more simplistic approach as maybe it did in some of its earlier works because you're establishing characters and so forth.
yeah.
In this case, you've already got that established, so they're able to work on developing the richness of the characters and the nuances of the relationships and so forth that really make this a very substantial piece of work, not just from an action standpoint, but also from a narrative standpoint as
Mm.
well.
And I love
Um,
Simon Pegg. I mean, he always brings a wonderful, dry sense of humor to everything, which is,
yes,
rather neat, which is that balance, isn't it?
yes, and the other thing too is that I like the fact that when you're watching this movie, um, you're watching Ethan Phelps. You're not watching Tom
Mm.
Cruise.
Yeah,
I mean, he sort of really
yeah.
falls back into his character and is not standing there larger than life saying, "Hi, I'm Tom Cruise. Pay attention to me." No, you're paying attention to his character in this film.
But I actually
Um,
find that with him and his movies. When I do watch his movies, I buy the character that he is. He is a really great actor for stepping into characterization and making it his own. But as you said, he doesn't Tom Cruise it, because
no,
Tom Cruise in real life is over the top.
yes,
And he brings that kind of expression into his characters, but he allows his characters to have a statement of their own.
yes. Yeah, the other thing that I liked about this too is that and it's one way in which the film I don't think has necessarily received as much credit as it deserves is I really thought this was the best action film of 2018. There were other films that did better at the box office and got greater notoriety, like Avengers and Black Panther and
Panther.
so forth, but I really thought this one stood out as being the best of the bunch.
Yeah, there was some clever stunts in here,
Yes,
the simple one with the bike, playing Skittles, and little things like that. And it's like, the driving scenes are always great, in all of
yes,
these movies. The getaway scenes are always great. And um, their timing of everything they do is impeccable. So, one assumes actually that the team, of stunt people and coordination, behind the scenes, it feels like they've been with him evolving for every one of these movies. And it
yes,
isn't, and that you can see that there's a synergy between, behind the camera and in front of the camera that seems to be very, very in sync.
yes. Well, and I really recommend also that anybody who wants to watch this who has not seen it, see it on as big a screen as you possibly
Hmm.
can. I mean, it's not in theaters anymore, but find a friend who's got a huge TV
Yes.
screen if you're going to watch it that way. Because if you try to watch this on a small screen on your computer or something like that,
Mm.
it's really going to lose a lot. But
Yeah.
seeing it on a big screen, it brings it all to life. So
And it's on Netflix. I watched it the other
yes,
day, actually, on my little 38 screen, but it was still big enough. But, I watched it again because there's sometimes you just want a good, thriller, a good action movie, where you
yes,
don't really want to think too much. You just want to be entertained. And I came away enjoying it just as much again as I did the first time. So,
I can believe that. Yep.
mm. All right, now we go to Julia Roberts and Ben is Back. And I know this one is, kind of a very serious topic. So why did you choose this one?
I chose this one because it's an excellent film at showing the concept of redemption. It tells the story of a teenage boy who becomes drug addicted and goes into rehab. And when he comes home to visit his family at Christmas, it sort of awakens a number of old ghosts from his past. And in the process of doing that, you also find out just exactly how low he sunk when he was back in the days of his addiction, not just in terms of how it affected him personally, but also in terms of the fallout that it was causing for his family, it was causing for his friends, and so forth. And he's really doing his best to try and make amends for all these past transgressions but circumstances are really pushing him to try and hold him back and create new problems. And it's just a very gripping story, told basically from the standpoint of the relationship between the teen boy, who is played by Lucas Hedges, and his mom, Julia Roberts, who is doing her best to try and be a mom, yet also, apply tough love and so forth to help him, come through and get clean again. This is a film that was turned out to be much, much better than I was expecting. I was kind of wondering how good it was going to be, because it just didn't seem to be getting a lot of play and so forth. But when I saw it in the theater, I was absolutely blown away by it. The performances in it are just terrific, and it's really a shame that both the leads really got ignored for this film when it came to award season nominations. Julia Roberts is terrific. Lucas Hedges is terrific. And, you can really feel the emotion that each of their characters is going through as they're trying to work through their circumstances. So yeah, and the other thing too is that you have a film that kind of gives you a unique fusion of both a family drama and also a crime story, because they're both factor into the narrative in this film. And it's kind of a unusual combination to bring together, but it's pulled off really quite well. So this one, go see it. It's really, it's a great film.
It's also hard to do, excuse me, addiction movies. And, you think about people who are in rehab and they're getting counseling and things like this, but nobody's giving that to the families. And so the families are still on alert, when they come home, because, they're just looking for the triggers, or they're looking for the mistake that's being made, because they haven't received any of their own treatment, so to speak, of how to deal with somebody that's in that process. And they very often can be a part of the problem and not part of the solution, because they're still stuck in what was and are not addressing what is now.
And they have to walk this tightrope of wanting to be loving and accepting, and yet feeling the need to kind of continually look over their shoulder.
Yeah, I've done a few shows actually on addiction, and I remember one who was a school friend of my daughter's, and very brave for her to come forward. And it's very often they have to hit rock bottom,
Yes.
before and nobody can help them until they decide to help themselves. And who knows what the rock bottom is? And for her, luckily it was that she was in the street, and it was a question: do I sell my body now for drugs, or is that my rock bottom? And that was her wake-up call. And she went to detox, and then she said to her mum, who picked her up, who normally should ask her mum to drop her off and she would immediately go and get another fix. This time it's take me to rehabilitation. I want to get well. And she made that choice. But it's people don't understand that, because they don't understand the pain of why they got into it in the first place. What is their rock bottom? What is it when they're going to decide to turn it around? And how can you help them? So I think we do need to see a lot more movies on this subject, because it is an epidemic right now.
Well, there were a couple of movies that came out last year on this subject. Obviously this one, and there was another one that came out called Beautiful Boy with Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet, which was dealing with roughly the same subject. It was based on a true story. It was a very good film, but I don't think it really quite captures the impact on a wider scale when you're dealing with someone who's going through recovery from addiction in the same way that Ben is Back does. Beautiful Boy was focusing mostly on what was going on with the teenager himself. This one deals with not just the teenager, but also all the people who love and care for him, and the various reactions that they have to him. So
a parent's, one of parents' worst nightmares, right? Kids getting addicted or getting into crime, or, becoming a victim of anything. And, I think what people don't understand is that, you're trying to help your kid, but you're feeling pretty powerless, because it's always that thing is, but did I do something wrong for them to take this path? So yeah, a huge subject, and glad that it's been addressed, and, definitely get people to get out there and see it now.
Well, also the idea too of, when do you feel like you're being a loving parent, and when do you feel like you're maybe being a potential enabler as well?
Right.
And that's a very big question that's brought up in this film.
Right. Yeah, the balance of life. Now we go to a totally different movie. I've never heard of it. Eighth Grade.
Yes, this is a delightful little comedy that came out over the summer, dealing with the story of a student who's in eighth grade, getting ready to start high school, and it's such an awkward time for teens when they're trying to fit in so many ways, dealing with the cool kids and the geeky kids, and trying to find your own self and your own footing as you're going through this. So you're seeing the various trials and tribulations, which some of us may find kind of nostalgic or funny. But when you're that age,
Horrific.
I mean, it's like, oh my God, this is the end of the world.
Yes, in eighth grade it is. Everything is like that.
And the other thing that's interesting about this film too is that it's showing the challenges that kids these days are going through at that age that a lot of us didn't have to do. I mean, dealing with things like going through active shooter drills in schools and things like that, things that we never had to consider, and yet that are part of everyday school life for kids that age these days.
Yeah.
And
of course, again, going back to the drugs,
Yeah.
And of course, having done shows on sex slavery, of abduction, which people don't realize that goes on in high school, the sex trade life that they hit there. I mean, yeah, my kids are all grown now, thank God. But knowing what we know now, I mean, it's scary for kids to be in high school.
I really don't envy them. I mean, I thought we had it tough when we went through, but like I say, we never had to deal with some of these kinds of things. And,
yeah.
But it features a delightful performance by newcomer Elsie Fisher in the lead role, and it was kind of interesting when I saw it at a screening over the summer. The director was there for a Q&A after the film. And when you're watching Elsie Fisher on the screen, she comes across as being so completely natural, and yet everything that she's doing on the screen apparently was scripted. And it's amazing to see her be able to pull this off in such a completely natural way.
She must have related in some way.
Yeah, I mean, you really do feel like you're watching an eighth grader who's playing an eighth grader in this film. But he also noted in the Q&A, I thought this was kind of funny. She was after they wrapped the filming, she's getting ready to start high school herself, and she apparently had auditioned for her high school play and got turned down by the school's drama teacher.
And now comes this movie, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, egg on your face, yeah.
And I mean, she ended up going on and get a Golden Globe nomination for this performance. So I mean, take that, Mr. Director.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to question your credentials.
So this is a nice little, kind of comedic respite, but it also deals with issues that kids are going through, and that sometimes as adults we may forget about. We can't remember back to when we went through these kinds of things, and it brings out the empathy in us, saying, you got to cut these kids a break on some of this stuff, because they feel like it's the end of the world, even though it may not be. It's still traumatic to them.
Yeah,
so.
and as a school kid, this is their world. They can't see any further.
Right.
They're caught up in this whole drama and trauma and hormones ranging and everything else. And so, yeah, it's time to kind of, give them a path to walk on, but show them the skills of how to navigate it. And I think that's the important thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, this is a movie I had heard of, and of course Rosamund Pike, when we normally see in glamorous roles, we're now seeing her not looking so glamorous in A Private War, and it's based on a true story.
Yes, it is. It tells the life story of a journalist who wrote for the London Times named Marie Colvin, and she was one of these war correspondents who was willing to go to the grittiest and most dangerous places in hotspots around the world, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, to get the story. I mean, she would do whatever it took to get the word out about what was happening. And she was walking a very fine line between being courageous and reckless. And you see not the toll that it takes on her physically and emotionally, but also she's got this essentially this private war going on within herself. After she comes back, for example, from a tour in Iraq, she sort of loses it for a while and has to go into a sort of rehab because she just can't cope with continuing to see so much death and destruction and peril surrounding her. And yet she also finds that she can't help herself, that this is her mission. This is her calling in life. She has to go do this no matter how horrific it is for her to witness.
Yeah.
She's destined to get the story out.
Yeah, she has to be the voice for them, or the channel for the voices.
Yes, exactly. And the performance by Rosamund Pike in this is just outstanding. I mean, this is another one of those roles that has pretty much been completely overlooked and forgotten in award season. She did receive a Golden Globe nomination for it, but that's it. I mean, otherwise she's been passed over, and it's really, really unfortunate because she does terrific work in this film in portraying a very complex character on many different fronts.
And as I said, we're so used to seeing her kind of more glamorous, and, femme fatale type thing. And to kind of see her in a more nitty gritty, down to earth type role is nice to see an actor kind of deviate, from their niche and, show another side of them. So, and I bet for her, it was a very juicy role as well.
Certainly one that was very physically demanding too, because just the scenes that were recreated with her having to go and work in these war zones. I mean, I can only imagine how tired she had to have been coming back from the set every day, because they were so physically demanding in addition to being emotionally harrowing.
Yeah, I bet it was a role of a lifetime, if you ask her.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, of course, we're going to something totally different. Melissa McCarthy, normally a comedian, slapstick, falling over, kind of using some of the old type humor in today's, humor, marrying the two together. And now she's in a role, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Is this a serious movie?
This is one of these films that sort of falls in between a comedy and a drama. It's based on a true story. It tells the saga of a writer named Lee Israel, who wrote biographies of famous and powerful women. And unfortunately, as time went on, her career started to falter, and she was having trouble getting work, and she was having trouble being taken seriously. And she needed to find, a new way to make some money. So one day, while doing some research for one of her books, she accidentally stumbled upon a literary letter that had been stuck inside a library book. And she said, I wonder if I could swipe this and see if I can sell it and make a few bucks on it. And she does. And she soon realizes that there's quite a market for these literary letters among collectors, from, letters that were written by famous authors. So she decides, well, maybe I can make a few more of these on my own.
Right.
So she starts creating forgeries and passing them off to brokers who initially sell them thinking that they're authentic, but then when the collectors start looking at them, they begin to say, something doesn't seem right here. So then she's placed in a position of having to try and, CYA as fast as she can to try and stay off the hook. It's also challenging to her because she's battling the bottle as well. I mean, she's pickled most of the time, and that kind of hampers her efforts to not just run her operation, but also to come up with solutions to try and keep herself off the hook as she's going through this. It's a breakthrough performance for Melissa McCarthy. I mean, we're used to seeing her in these, kind of classic comedic roles, but in this case, she needs to be both funny and, serious in a number of scenes, and she absolutely nails it. Terrific performance. She's also got a cohort in the film played by Richard E. Grant, who's sort of he sort of fences some of her work at times, but he's completely untrustworthy because he too is, imbibing most of the time. and he ends up kind of complicating her efforts as she goes through this. He too has also he and Melissa McCarthy have both been nominated for Oscars for their performances. Really a wonderful, wonderful film. And as biopics go, it's kind of hard to find one that's better than this one. It's really very well done on so many fronts.
And good to see her also taking on a different type of role.
Yes.
Because again, people get stuck in a particular niche. Everybody expects them to be that type of actor. And then for them to step out of it and go in to do something else, it's nice to see.
I think this is the kind of film that really opens the door for her to be able to do other kinds of work, because this really is a pretty radical departure from a lot of the other stuff that she's done. Even though there is a lot of humor in this, it's of a more sophisticated and less over-the-top nature than what she's done in a lot of her other roles. This is more witty than
slapstick funny,
belly laugh.
Yeah. Well, here's another movie that I was dog-tired to go and see, but I fell sick and I couldn't go and see it. And I've heard other people who've seen it and it's mixed reviews, is The Favorite.
This is a dark comedy talking about the rule of Queen Anne of England. And two of her sort of ladies in waiting who are sort of vying for her attention to be the favorite, as the title says. It's a dark comedy that is laugh out loud from start to finish. It's because it's dark, though. I mean, some people may find it either offensive or that sometimes it goes too far, but if you like your comedies that have an edge to it, this is definitely the film for you. It features absolutely outstanding performances by the three leads, played by Olivia Colman, Emma Stone, and Rachel Weisz, all of whom have been nominated for Oscars.
And won the Golden Globe.
Yes. Olivia Colman took home the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy, and very deservedly so. It's really nice to see her getting the recognition. She's been a sort of a journeyman actress all these years and very quietly doing very good work that has gone unrecognized. But this has given her an opportunity to really stand out, really shine, and get her a name that is more recognizable than what it had been previously.
I've seen her a lot in a lot of British dramas,
Yes.
and she always brings a different character to the scene. You can always see there's a touch of herself in there, but it is nice to see, someone, like her that normally would, always play second fiddle along the line, to play the lead role and be given that chance.
Exactly. And like I say, she's backed up by two terrific supporting performances by Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz. I mean, they're both, they've already both won Oscars for other roles, but the work that they do here is on par with their award-winning performances. The film also features wonderful production values for the period, excellent recreations that are beautifully done and beautifully shot. This is it's a gorgeous film to look at, as well as one that's going to make you, bust a gut while you're laughing, while you're watching it.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it. Of course, now we're looking at a totally different type of movie, more intense, with Ethan Hawke, First Reformed.
Yes, this is a film that came out last summer, and I was blown away by it at the time. It was, for me, up to that point, one of the best films I had seen all of last year, and it had the staying power to keep it on my top 10 list for the year. It tells the story of a troubled minister, I should say, who's running a small historic parish in upstate New York that's kind of faltering, and he's doing his best to try and keep it alive, but also to keep himself alive. He's going through crisis of faith. He's going through some health issues. He's battling the bottle. He's trying to do his best to counsel his parishioners about issues over which he almost feels powerless to be able to help to counsel them about. Ethan Hawke is this is the best performance of his career, in my opinion, and it's kind of a shame that he's pretty much been overlooked in award season because he's just outstanding in the role. This is not an easy movie to watch. I will admit it's very intense. It's very gripping, particularly when you're seeing somebody who is going through so many challenges on so many fronts and doesn't really know how to get a handle on them. Um, but he's he does his best as he can, and has to come to realize that there is such a thing as hope. There is such a possibility as having the ability to be happy. But boy, sometimes when you're going through a lot of stuff, it really takes a lot of work to be able to search for it and find it. And that's what he's going through in this film. Was written and directed by Paul Schrader, who did the screenplay many years ago for the Martin Scorsese film Taxi Driver. So that kind of in itself gives you an idea of the intensity level that you're dealing with in this particular story.
Not for the faint of heart, right?
No.
Right. Now, here's a movie definitely getting a great deal of buzz, is Green Book. And actually, it's really, really nice to see Viggo Mortensen playing a light-hearted person for a change, because normally you're always seeing him tattooed, beating people up, and it's he almost looks comedic in this.
Yes. This is a charming film in many ways. It's a combination sort of road trip buddy movie set in a historical setting where a number of difficult forces are at work governing the journey involved. It tells the story of an African American pianist who goes on a concert tour of the South in the early 1960s. And the driver that he hires to chauffeur him to his various concert dates, who is a New York Italian American. And just the combination of those two, given the time period, is kind of like, it's like oil and water going into it in many ways. Yet it's interesting when they come up against the issues that they face while traveling through the American South at that time. It forges a bond between the two of them. The driver, played by Viggo Mortensen, is doing whatever he can to look out for his boss, Mahershala Ali, to make sure he's not getting a raw deal. Mm-hmm. And yet, as a cultured and artistic black man at the time, he's going through a part of the country that doesn't want to cut him any breaks just because he's black.
Right.
So this is a very evolutionary and transformative kind of story that plays out over the course of their journey together. And as it is based on a true story, and it also led to what turned out to be a lifelong friendship between two people who you would least expect to even know each other, let alone become acquainted as they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another one on my list to go and see. And the bravado of being a black man to go in the South in the 60s and then traveling with a white guy was very wise. Somebody who's got your back. But again, we're looking at the times and going, has there been enough change? And all of these things always come into question, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And this one, this is one of those pictures that's a real kind of crowd pleaser on so many fronts, because it's warm, it's funny, it's touching, it's frustrating, it's dramatic. And it's really made possible through the combination of the two performances by Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali, both of whom do outstanding jobs in their performances. Both of whom have been nominated or won awards multiple times over already, right, leading up to the Oscars. And they're both nominated for the Oscars again this year too. So just a terrific film. The one thing that it did kind of remind me of when I first wrote about this is there are many things about the film that remind me of the film Hidden Figures. It came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, brilliant movie. Love that movie.
Yeah, where you're seeing a period piece where you're seeing the challenges that African Americans went through just to be able to be themselves and allow their talents to come through. and then having to find advocates who would
Yes.
be willing to step forward and make sure they didn't get a raw deal.
Hmm.
Um, so this is a film that when I went to see it again turned out to be much better than I was expecting. I wasn't thinking it was going to be bad, but I didn't think it was going to be as good as it is. So this
Okay,
one, go see this one.
that's a thumbs up. Okay, now we're going to Natalie Portman in Annihilation.
Yes, this is my number one movie of last year, and it's a combination science fiction and smart horror film that is so profound on so many levels. Anybody who's a student of metaphysics and spirituality will come away from this movie blown away by it, because it gets into so many interesting and intense concepts in these areas, and to do so through the context of a science fiction and smart horror film movie context is just outstanding. The way this film has been pulled off. It was made by the same director who made the science fiction film Ex Machina that came out a couple of years ago.
That was another brilliant movie.
Yeah, the thing is, if you like that movie, you'll absolutely love this one, because it's taken his directorial work to an entirely new level. This film, a lot of people said to me that they've never heard of it. That's because it had the unfortunate timing of its release to come out in the window between when Black Panther and Avengers was released.
Right.
So virtually nobody saw it. And thankfully, it's beginning to find an audience through various home viewing options, which is good. I'm glad to see it's getting the recognition that it's deserving, because now that the hype of the other films has worn off, and people are getting around to seeing other things that they didn't get to in theaters when it came out originally, they're looking at this and saying, how come I never heard of this movie? How come I didn't see this when it was in the theater? And I'm like, well, unfortunately, it was not marketed as well as it could have been in terms of timing and effectiveness, especially given what it was up against. But if you have the chance to go see this one, by all means, do go see it. And again, watch it on as big a screen as you possibly can, because the special effects in this film are absolutely dazzling.
Right.
It will keep you riveted from start to finish.
Okay, another one on the list. Now we're going to go to a bottom of the list, the bloopers. And start going through that. This is one I've not even ever heard of. Overlord?
Yes, Overlord is a film that was part of the reason it made the list is because it was a movie that couldn't quite make up its mind what it wanted to be. It was a film that deals with kind of a horror story set during World War II. So it was somewhat unique from that standpoint, but in the course of telling the story, the film could never quite make up its mind about whether it wanted to be a classic horror story, a classic World War II movie, or, as becomes apparent toward the end of the film, a sort of an over-the-top campy romp.
Right, right.
And it never really quite gels in terms of doing any of them particularly well. I thought it worked best when it was an over-the-top campy romp, personally. But that came a little too late and a little too sparsely to really salvage the rest of the film. So kind of a missed opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Trying to please too many, demographics instead of just sticking to kind of one particular style.
Exactly. And it was somewhat surprised too in the fact that this was produced by J.J. Abrams, who's known for the current Star Wars films and the current Star Trek films. And he just sort of, I think he misfired on this one.
Right. Now, this one surprises me because of the cast. Rupert Everett, Colin Firth, Colin Morgan, Edwin Thomas, and Emma Watson in The Happy Prince. Now, why is this on your
this one surprised me, not only because of the cast, but also because of the subject matter. This is a film that basically talks about the latter days of the life of Oscar Wilde. And I was scratching my head when I came out of the theater, because I said to myself, how does one make Oscar Wilde boring?
Yeah. Yes. that doesn't go in the same sentence.
No, it really doesn't. I mean, I was certainly expecting more in terms of the sort of, wit and wisdom that he imparted through his writings and his stage shows and so forth. And that's pretty much absent here. It's really a rather dark and depressing story about the days of his life after he got out of prison and trying to find his way in the world. And it doesn't really do anything to shed light on who the character is, who he was. It's just sort of, you're kind of sitting around watching him run out the clock, as it
Right.
were.
Right.
And
who wants to
boy,
remember Oscar that way?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now, this surprises me because I really, really wanted to go see this. Instead of seeing this, I actually went to go and see the Oprah Winfrey movie, which I was so disappointed in. Can't remember its name now.
A lot of people were, oh, Wrinkle in Time.
Yes, right. And I wanted to see this instead, The Isle of Dogs. But you've got this on your bottom list. So did I make the right choice going to see the other movie? I don't think so.
I mean, it's kind of like, do you want the lukewarm porridge or the lukewarm grits? I mean, yeah, Isle of Dogs I was really disappointed by because I didn't find it that particularly interesting or charming. In some ways, I even had to kind of question some of the content. I found it rather strange in terms of the setting of the story and so forth.
But it's Japanese, so is
yeah,
that
I mean,
the Japanese strangeness that they bring into it?
No, it was almost like the film, excuse me, was being a little disparaging in its presentation of the Japanese, which I found troubling. But as wonderful as the animation was, and I really can't take anything away from that, the story just to me wasn't that interesting. It just did not have some of the charm and wit that some of Wes Anderson's other films have had. Mm-hmm. I came out of the film again, kind of scratching my head, saying, "Why is everyone raving about this?" I mean, right. if you like the animation, okay, that's fine. But to me, there's got to be a little more substance to go with it, and I just didn't find that it really carried that off in quite the way that I thought the film should have.
Right. Okay. And then we'll give that one a miss. So the next one is Suspiria.
Yes. Now, this was a remake of a classic horror film from the 1970s, telling the story of a young woman's involvement with a dancing troupe that has some very unusual characters running it. It's a film that, from what I haven't seen the original, but from what I understand, it deviates considerably from the storyline in the original, and starts getting into a lot of really weird kinds of paranormal and horror aspects that are kind of hard to fathom, kind of hard to explain. The film also initially starts out quite slow. I was really kind of trying my patience as I was watching it. It got better as it was going along. So I was thinking, okay, this is leading me someplace that's going to be really interesting, and there's going to be a payoff with this. And yet, when I got to the final act of the film, it was so over the top and seemed really kind of incongruent with everything that preceded it, that I just came away going, what the hell did I just watch?
Right. Certainly not a Kill Bill type movie.
No,
over the top in such an artistic way that you could buy it, Yeah,
I didn't really quite know where it was going and what it was trying to accomplish, and
it was trying but not meeting its target.
No, exactly. Yeah. This was a movie that was also it was made by the same director who made Call Me by Your Name, which came out the year before, and I didn't like that one either. So
maybe you just don't like his style.
I guess I'm finding that I just don't like this director's work. I mean,
right.
I find it kind of overrated, and it's visually interesting in many ways, but again, to me, a movie's got to offer more.
Right.
Than just
Well,
visuals.
now, here we go to another one which is filled with huge amount of stars: Liam Neeson, Robert Duvall, um, you know, uh, what's it, John, I haven't got my glasses on, Jackie Weaver, Daniel Cololi, so many people here.
Not to mention Viola Davis.
Colin Farrell, yeah, Viola Davis,
Yeah.
and it's called Windows.
Oh,
So with
no,
such an
Widows.
Widows, with such an enormous cast, what went wrong?
Yeah, it basically told a story that to me was really very implausible in many ways from start to finish. The film is filled with lots of plot holes. It's a combination crime and political thriller set in Chicago. Of course, with that being my hometown, I always tend to gravitate to films with that I have sort of a soft spot for them. But this one it was a total misfire in many ways from my standpoint. It was a movie that was getting a fair amount of buzz when it was initially released, but gosh, I mean, I came away from it saying, I'm not buying any of this. The story just did not speak to me whatsoever. And I felt bad because it really did represent kind of a waste of all the talent that was available for the director to work with.
Yeah, so it's not the talent, it was actually the script.
Yeah. Well, and I think the director to a certain extent too, because this was made by Steve McQueen, who also directed 12 Years a Slave several years ago, which I also didn't like. I don't know if this is a case of just not liking the director's work or not liking his style, but I've just found that his films don't really speak to me. I will admit I like this more than I like 12 Years a Slave, but
and of course that went on to win the Oscar. So so sometimes that is kind of try it and see for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, I'm afraid I can't see the name of this next movie because it's very faint print on the poster here.
Oh, okay.
What's this name of this movie?
It's Ready Player One. It was one of the latest films from Steven Spielberg.
Yes.
This one I think was sort of an attempt by Spielberg to revive sort of the heyday of his filmmaking career from the 80s when he did movies like E.T. and Close Encounters and so forth. This is a story that's set in the year 2045 with a young man who goes into a virtual reality game and is set upon, fulfilling a quest to take down the evildoers and so forth. And ironically, it's filled with lots of 80s nostalgia references in terms of movies and music and so forth. Kind of an acknowledgement of what Spielberg was trying to do and reflected
an homage to the past.
An homage to the past, exactly. And I couldn't understand the fascination with 80s nostalgia for a film that's supposed to be set 25 years from now.
Right. Yeah. I hope that the 80s isn't a representation of the last century.
But the thing that I found when I was watching this is that it's almost an assault on the senses in the fact that it's just so in your face with the visual references and so forth that I found it exhausting to watch. I mean, and it's a long movie on top of it, so it just kept coming at me relentlessly, and I began, during the dramatic climax when everybody's supposed to be on the edge of the seat, I'm looking at my watch saying, "Is this almost over?"
Maybe you're just too old, Brent, and you need to be a teenager to get into this movie.
I felt relieved when the credits finally rolled, because I can finally get out of here now. It was disappointing.
Yeah.
It's
especially from Spielberg, because normally he is the director that knows how to direct kids.
One thing that I found, though, in a lot of his movies over the past, say, 15 years or so, he doesn't know how to rein himself in. His later movies have tended to be rather bloated and very much in need of editing. I don't know if it's a case of, he's so excited with all the footage he's got to work with that he wants to be sure to include it all and pack it all into the film. But sometimes the old saying, less is more, really is true.
Yeah.
And in this case, I just felt that it was too much of everything.
Right.
So
Leaving nothing. And really, when you are thinking about it, it's designed at the youth genre. And when you think about it, we're looking at devices today as being too much and over the
yes,
top, not well balanced. So it seems to be a movie, whoops, it's telling us of our second show, that is maybe more catering to that,
could be. Yeah.
but which is, so of course, something we're wanting people to refrain from, not cater to. Now let's look at this next movie, Keira Knightley, Colette, based on a true
Yes.
story. Why
Yes.
did you not like this one?
This was a biopic about the famous French author Colette, and to me, it just sort of played like a cheap tawdry novel.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Colette was kind of a colorful character, but it just kind of felt like it was being a little too trashy, given the
Mm-hmm.
subject matter involved. Um, I again kind of came away from it sort of scratching my head, thinking to myself, this was supposed to be a period piece biographical film. And, I kind of felt like I was watching sort of a period piece Jekyll and Suzanne novel put on screen. I mean, it just, it maybe it was, it just, maybe it was something about me. I don't know. But it just didn't quite speak to me, despite the fact that it did have a good performance by Keira Knightley. This one, as I understand, has turned out to be something of a disappointment, I guess, from the people who were pushing it, because I think they were thinking that it was going to lead to more accolades than it got, and it honestly didn't get any.
Right.
Certainly not with me.
Yeah. Well, now The Rider. Don't even know if I heard of this one.
This was an independent production that came out. I think actually it came out in some places very late in 2017, but didn't go into general release until 2018. It's the story of a rodeo rider who suffers a serious injury and is trying to figure out his way back from the injury and what he wants for the next half of his life and so forth. And, he's been so drawn to this profession and this career that he has a hard time walking away from it. It is beautifully filmed. I can't really take anything away from that, and it features a fairly decent performance in the lead role. But the movie is so riddled with cliches.
Mm.
Even some of the cinematography is rather cliched that I had a hard time understanding why everyone was raving about this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some cases, I almost found it kind of laughable. And this was a film that went on to get quite a few nominations in the Independent Spirit Awards competition last year, which is kind of like the Oscars for the independent film industry. And I didn't get it.
Right. Well, I mean, your next movie is, kind of controversial too, because it's won an award, is Roma.
Oh yes, now I know I'm probably going to catch hell for this one. This film I will admit, it is exquisitely filmed in black and white. It's positively gorgeous to look at, and that's about it. This is a film that's based on the director's upbringing in a section of Mexico City called Roma, upper middle class neighborhood, and the trials and tribulations that his film family faces. And I just, as I said in my write-up about it, this is one of these movies that everyone seems to be developing, all the critics seem to be developing a pack mentality about, saying, oh, it's gorgeous, it's wonderful. And I came out of the theater saying to myself, I'm sorry, but the emperor is naked. I just don't see what everyone has been talking about with this.
Is it because it was black and white and artsy?
No, oh, no. Well, for why they liked it?
Yeah.
It could be. I mean, like I say, I can't take anything away from the look of the film. It's gorgeous to look at, but
just the story.
Again, it's not enough. I mean, to me, in many ways, home movies are still home movies, no matter how beautifully they're shot.
Right.
And in many ways, that's, I think, what was going on here. It's obviously a project that he felt very personally passionate about, and that's fine. But I mean,
It
give
just wasn't
people
enough.
something to
Yeah.
hang on to as far as why you should care about the characters,
Yeah.
why you should care about the story, and that's the other thing too, is the fact that it really does not provide viewers with much in the way of a backstory.
Right. So it's
Um,
hard to connect to it.
Very hard to connect to it.
Mhm.
So
Okay, well,
I,
let's
I
look
mean,
at Don't Leave
yeah.
Home.
Oh yes. Well, it's a very fitting title. I will say that much. um, this was, yeah,
Don't leave home and go to the cinema to watch
no,
this movie.
exactly. No, this was my number one worst film of last year. It was a horror film that was trying to be sort of bring in mystical and religious and spiritual influences into the story, and had a look that was almost kind of sort of a goth kind of look to it. And I'm watching it and saying to myself, there's nothing scary about this. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of horror films to begin with, but I thought the premise sounded interesting, and I thought the look of the film would make it worthwhile seeing, but it just never gets off the ground. And it violates cardinal rule number one about horror films, and that's you've got to be scary if you're going to be a horror movie.
Yes.
I
It's got
mean,
to be horrifying, not
yeah,
horrific.
I mean, I mean, if it's not going to be, well, then I could have very well done exactly what the movie title said and just stayed home.
Right, right. Well, this covers your top 10 and your top bottom movies. And so for this week, we're going to have you chew that over and listen to all the movies. And, you decide, do you agree? Or, are you going to now go and see a movie that you'd given a miss on? And are you going to wish that you had seen some movies that you agree with Brent on? And that next week, we're going to be bringing you his Oscar picks and why and who he think is going to win. And really excited about that. As I said, he has a very good track record. So we're going to be bringing that to you next week. So stay tuned for that. And, you can look at his blog here where he goes into more detail on all of the movies. And would you please now, love, give everybody the link that they can go to, A, for your books, B, for the blog on the Oscars this year for 2018, and how people can get hold of you.
You can find everything on my website, which is really easy to remember, brentmarchant.com.
Right. And everything is there, the blog and everything
Everything's
else.
there. The blog is there. Links for the books are there. Yeah, so I mean, you'll find everything.
And right here on Self-Discovery Media, yes, folks, we've changed our name from Self-Discovery Radio to selfdiscoverymedia.com. You just need to put in his name and all the shows that I've done with him on his books and every one of his books. This is, I don't know, 4th year of doing the Oscars.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. And so, you can go back and look at some of the other ones to see if you agreed with him back then as well. And come and join us next week to hear who's going to win the Oscars. Thanks a lot, Brent. Catch you next week.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
Bye for now, folks. For more wonderful shows like this, please go to selfdiscoveryradio.com, podcasts, and see our lineup. And if you wish to support us, we have a funded button. Please stay tuned for our next show.